Hi, everybody, and welcome to this video, which I am calling The Message Which Doesn't Need to Be Given. And this came to me the other day while I was in meditation. The Message Which Doesn't Need to Be Given. The title is what I heard in meditation. Then I also heard the message which has already been given throughout time. And finally, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj said, there are many messengers, or there will be many messengers, there have been many messengers, but only one message. Okay, so what is this message basically about? Well, I have broken it into three different words: love, one, and freedom. And although they look like three different things, they're all basically expressing what I believe the absolute supreme reality is all about. Or as they refer to it in Hinduism, Parabrahman. So we're talking about what is. Now that may sound like a big claim, what is? But actually, in many ways, it's very simple. We're like spiritual scientists, and we're simply looking around and looking within and asking, what is true? Now, it can only be true for you. What resonates with you as being true? What seems to be true? But truth is it's a great thing for anybody who is living in this reality. It's very helpful, of course. We don't want to delude ourselves. We're trying to find out what is the truth about reality, about what is. And we'll speak more about that. So, love, one, freedom. Now, I have included some very brief, concise sentences here to just simply express what I'm pointing towards. What do I mean when I say love, one, freedom? So the first one, God is love. God is unconditional love, supreme love, absolute love. This isn't just a feeling. Of course, it's an energy, it's a state, it's a reality. One, all is one. All is one. There's only one life, one reality. Many different perceptions of the one reality, but in essence, there's only one universe, one life happening here and now. Freedom, you are free. Now, this is a freedom. Now, I would say you are free on the relative level. But of course, as soon as I say that, I stop myself because I know some people don't feel free in their lives. We can discuss that later. But this freedom is pointing to an absolute freedom. So even if you are perhaps right now a prisoner in a jail cell somewhere, we're not talking about your physical body. We're talking about something that's beyond the physical body, or we could even say prior to the physical body, or different than the physical body. So this is an absolute freedom. We could call it a spiritual freedom, and it's already the case. This is not something that you have to achieve. It's already the case. It's the reality of your spiritual self. Okay? So basically, this is the message. I could just stop now and say, this is the message that I believe all religions, all spiritual teachers, all saints and sages and mystics have been speaking about in some way or another throughout time. And I think most people would agree with the essence of what these messages are saying, that God is love. And therefore, we should live love. We can live love. We suffer less if we live love, think love, feel love. All is one. We could look at this even scientifically. One planet, one universe, one humanity, right? One race, one species. So all is one. There are not two lives. There's one life, and all of us are included in that one life. So for sure, everything is interconnected, and we are seeing that more and more every day, of course. Now that we have the invention of the internet and things like that, it's so much more obvious that we are definitely more similar than we are different. But this, of course, is actually also pointing to A oneness, again, that is a spiritual oneness. So it's going beyond even the physical and the mental, and the conceptual. Okay, so this is a spiritual reality of oneness. Freedom, again, you are free. It has been said, there is no one to save, there is no one to liberate, because there is no one. So this is part of that message too, which we'll get to, is that you're not actually a separate person. You're not actually a separate self. If you look within the human body, there's no center, there's no entity. And because there isn't, then that state itself is free. It's not that the person is free, it's that the spiritual state, we could say, is already free. So, shall we continue? And if I do stop, like a moment like this, sometimes I will feel silence sort of come over me. Remember that silence is really the message anyways. Silence, stillness, emptiness, nothingness. So all these words are just words, symbols, concepts, ideas, and they either resonate with you or they don't, and that's beautiful and wonderful. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't change the reality of things. So, as I mentioned before, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, he wrote the book, I Am That. It's a spiritual classic. He's basically my primary teacher. And so I would like to start with 7 sentences or sayings from Nisargadatta. So I think this is, let's say, maybe his most well-known or famous quote. It goes something like this: wisdom says, I am nothing. I am not a thing. But love says, I am everything and everyone. And between those two, my life seems to flow. Nothing, everything. Nothing, everything. Number 2, God is the totality of consciousness. So God alone exists. There is nothing that isn't God, that isn't the beloved, that isn't reality, that isn't life. There's no separation. Everything is divine. Everything is sacred. The creator and creation are not separate. They are one thing, no thing, however you want to describe it. And what is consciousness? Consciousness is anything that changes. So thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, perceptions, associations, memories, fantasies, time, space, everything that can be observed as changing, we can call consciousness. Nisargadatta says the awareness that is, it's both watching that which changes, but it's also the space in which change happens. It doesn't change. So changeless awareness and changing consciousness, I would say that these two are two sides of the same coin of Parabrahman, or the absolute supreme reality. So the absolute is actually beyond awareness and consciousness, but it's a really great starting point to look at awareness and consciousness, that which doesn't change and that which is always changing, and to explore their relationship and to investigate them again as a spiritual scientist, let's say. So what is happening? What is actually happening in your consciousness right now? What are you thinking, feeling? What are you perceiving? What is your direct experience of this moment, of reality, of what is? And of course, the question has to be asked, who is perceiving? What is perceiving? As Sailor Bob Adamson says, keep seeing that nothing is seeing. Keep coming back. Keep noticing I love this word noticing because there's no effort involved. This is not an arduous, stressful, effortful process or procedure. It's really an act of love because you love truth, you love what is, you love yourself, and you want to know what is true, what is actually happening here, now, always, forever. So because you love the truth, you can't help but wanting to explore and discover what is. And so we keep noticing what is, what's happening, and who is it happening for? Who is it happening to? Can we find a who? You may say, it's all happening to me, to my things, to my body, to my mind. I, but this I is just, it's a letter and also a word. And it's pointing to what though? The body, the mind, the senses? Or is there something primary before all of these physical, conceptual things? What is the actual perceiving, the seeing, the awareing? So not the subject being the body or the object of perception, but the perceiving itself. What is that? Is it a thing? Can it be described? Does it have a form, a shape, a name? So this is what we're pointing towards. This is part of the discovery, the realization of the ultimate self. Number 3, there is variety and difference, but no separation anywhere. Usually when people ask me, what is non-duality? What do you mean by that? I will read number 3. I will tell them, look, yes, of course, there is great variety, diversity, difference, man, woman, tall, short, and we need all of these things to have experience. If everything was just a white wall or something like that, there would be no experience. So we need this play of opposites to have experience. If we want experience, I'm not saying we need experience, but if we want to have experience, then of course we have to have this play of opposites, pain and pleasure, what we might call good, bad, hot, cold, etc., etc. So there is variety and difference, but there's no separation. There's no separation anywhere. Again, there is one life, one reality, one God, one unmanifest reality. And within that, there is all kinds of colors and shapes and forms and differences and gradations and percentages, and everything is possible. Everything is possible within this oneness, apparently. So number 4, excuse me, you are freedom itself. This is, of course, Nisargadatta's quote. He says, to the person saying, I want to be free, I want to be free. He says, stop. You are already and have always been and will always be freedom itself. Or as Tony Parsons says, all there is liberation. You're seeking for something that is already and always the case. Liberation, freedom. But of course, the personal relative self will say, perhaps, I don't feel free. And that's great in the sense that that person's being honest. Okay, that's your direct experience of this moment. You don't feel free. So take a look a little bit more deeply. Ask these kind of questions. This is the process, apparently. It doesn't happen for everybody. It happens differently for everybody. Some people just get it one day. Some people need to study this and look for years, apparently. So there's not just exactly one way to realize the truth. But this is what happens. This is the process that we're engaged in. Looking, noticing what is happening now, what is actually happening. And it may be seen that you are freedom itself. Even just hearing that, there may be a relaxation, a letting go of stress, a letting go of anxiety. Where does that resonate as being true within you? I am already free. I am freedom itself. So again, this is beyond the personal, relative, small, I am free, I am not free, I am free, I'm not free. This is the relative freedom that most people speak about. This is the absolute freedom that we're pointing to. I mean, the universe is free. Now, there are laws like gravity and this, that, and the other, but there's something essentially free because, again, there's essentially something that's nothing. Everything is nothing. And as no thing, it's free. Because it's not a something. It's free in its nothingness. Okay? So, number 5, you are nothing perceivable or conceivable, but that which makes all perception possible. So you are nothing physical and you are nothing mental, but you are that which makes all perception possible. And what is that? Nisargadatta says it is the Supreme, or life. The sun is shining, and because the sun is shining, life can happen and does happen on our planet. Without that sun shining, there'd be no life. And this life, we can call it dualistic in its appearance. There's war and peace and love and hate. So we can't say that the sun is causing, it's doing this. It's not choosing love or peace or hatred or war, but because it is, life is. So that's what this is pointing to. It's saying because the Absolute Supreme is, everything else is allowed to be in its own expression. But the Supreme itself isn't doing anything. It's not even creating something. It just simply is. It is the source of life. It is the source. And because it is, everything else is allowed, or the conditions are right, we could say. They are able to appear and disappear, to be created and destroyed. Now, ultimately, you are that Absolute Supreme. And that may seem like a huge jump from being a small, individual, separate person to being the Absolute Supreme Reality. But Nisargadatta helps us to get from point A to point B. Of course, there is no point A, there is no point B. But that's how it looks on the relative level. Number 6, yes, you are not a person. Now, I don't recommend necessarily walking around, going to the bank, telling people, hey, I'm not a person. I'm not a person. I'm not a person. Right? It sounds a little, what does that actually mean, you are not a person? Well, it's a bit, we'll get to it a little bit later, but basically science tells us that the brain creates a sense of self. It creates a sense of self. Maybe at around the age of 1 or 2, a sense of self starts to develop. And it solidifies as that child gets older and older. So it's a sense of a self, but that doesn't mean that there actually is a self. There's a great diagram, picture, call it what you will, of a brain. And they open the brain and there's a little somebody inside, right? Controlling everything, working the mechanism of the body. We're saying basically, this message is saying that there is no little person inside. There is no thing. There is no one. There's no entity. There's no center. Now, going back to being honest with yourself, of course, most people, 7 billion people on the planet today, if you ask them, are you a person? Most of them, I think, will say, yes, I am a person. Why do they say that? Because they feel like a person. As Tony Parsons says, there's an energetic contraction. So this is not just a belief, but it's an experience of feeling like you're inside the body and like everything else is outside the body. So it's an energetic contraction, a sense of separation. There is a belief and an experience of I and other. And what this message is saying is that this sense of I and other can collapse. Now, to the I, that may or may not sound scary. Like, oh, I need that kind of separation. I need that kind of duality in order to live. But this message is saying, no, actually, you don't need it. The body is, intelligence and creativity are happening. The body is very intelligent. Life is very intelligent, very creative. It doesn't actually need this evolutionary creation, we could call it, of creating a false self, a separate self. You can still act intelligently and wisely without feeling separate. That's the good news. So you don't need to feel this separation. Now, it's not just separation between I and other, it's I and the world, I and Mother Nature, I and God. It's any separation. It dissolves, it can dissolve, disappear, the dissolution of the I. It vanishes. As Papaji said to Muji, if you want to experience reality, if you want reality, you must disappear. Now, he wasn't talking about the physical body. He wasn't talking about the essence of Muji. He was talking about this false, abstract, conceptual self, which is created by the brain. And as Muji goes on to tell, that's exactly what happened. It just disappeared. That sense of self disappeared, and what was left was reality. Now, can the ego do it? Can this abstract self get rid of itself? No, I would say no. Eckhart Tolle says, all you can actually do is sort of create the conditions for the death of the ego. Now, we should say right away that it doesn't have to happen. Nothing has to happen. Nothing has to happen. This is already the perfect expression of oneness. So whether or not there's an ego or not an ego, or a sense of contraction or not a sense of contraction, again, we're pointing to something that's beyond this dualistic experience of reality. So the ego doesn't have to die, but it may die, it may collapse, it may disappear. And nobody can actually tell you, what you have to do. It's not A plus B equals C, because many people have tried A plus B equals C and it hasn't happened. The ego is still there. This sense of being separate is still there. But that being said, if we looked at this scientifically, I would say that there is, you can look at statistics that would say that if you are engaged in some sense of spiritual practice, one that I would say is not strengthening the sense of separation, but reducing the sense of separation, that this is helpful. At least it's pointing you in the right direction, because it could be that this ego, this sense of self, never dies. But the sense of self can reduce. And with that sense of self reducing, also the suffering that is experienced reduces. Because more and more, you just can't believe the stories of the mind. So with the dissolution of the I is also the dissolution of the sufferer. Maybe suffering would still exist, but there's no longer going to be a someone that is attached to that suffering. There's no longer a sufferer. There may or may not, there will always be pain and pleasure for the body. Pain, pleasure, you cut your finger, that's going to hurt. But the suffering can definitely reduce, and that suffering, I would say, can even disappear. Eckhart Tolle calls that the pain body, the emotional aspect of the ego. So that pain body can disappear as well. I remember Oprah Winfrey asking Eckhart, so wait, do you have a pain body? And he said, no. When the ego disappeared, the pain body went with it. Okay, I don't want to go too much into that, but so you are not what you imagine yourself to be. When Nisargadatta met his guru, he said two things basically to him. That you are not what you take yourself to be. You are not what you think yourself to be. You are not what you imagine yourself to be, which is, I imagine myself to be this little person, this body, and this mind. And his guru said, no, you're actually beyond that. You are the absolute supreme reality. the Parabrahman. And Nisargadatta believed him. His words rang true. It resonated with him. And he just contemplated this for 3 years. And then he had this process of self-realization. As he calls it, the fruit ripened, it fell off the tree. And of course, that fruit could never go back up on the branch. It was a done deal, finished. Now, Tony Parsons, when he says this happens, you realize that the ego was never happening. It's the death of something that was never actually happening. That's the illusion. That's the dream. We really feel like it's something that's happening, that there is a noun, there is an object, there is an ego. But when it dies, you see it was just a process happening in the brain. And then it stops and you realize it was never actually a thing. It was just a verb. It was just the brain creating a sense of self for its own reasons. It's actually out of love. The brain trying to love the body, protect the person. But we find out that it wasn't necessary after all. Number 7, Nisargadatta says, I have come to blast your concepts and leave you in a conceptless state. So this message is not about acquiring more information, more knowledge, more beliefs, more ideas. Actually, what Nisargadatta says is, this is the most dangerous thing for the self. Tony Parsons often says, the ego does not want to hear this message. And sometimes people will become angry and leave the room when this message is being spoken. Adyashanti says, this is the destruction, the end of you. That enlightenment is not about adding and getting and acquiring. It's about destruction. It's about letting go. It's ego death. It's about the end of your personal, small, relative world. So, sound good or sound not good? Now, the ego is the ego believes, there's a part of the ego that believes that it will acquire something. It will get something if it dies, which of course is impossible. The ego hasn't really thought this out well. But it believes, I can get something. I want enlightenment. I want liberation. I want my own death. Because when I die, I will get something. But of course, that can't be true. Because if it's a true death of the ego, then there's no one left to get anything. All that remains is nothing. But it's a nothing that is everything. It's an emptiness, which is fullness. But there's no one there left to acquire something. Nobody will benefit from enlightenment or liberation. So many people would ask, well, why do it? Well, for some people, there's no choice. There's just a hunger and a desire for this to happen. And that, of course, is, we could say, our true selves emerging forth and like busting through the ego, busting through illusion, busting through that which is false, emerging like a flower. It's just going to grow. It's just going to blossom. It's just going to happen. And there's nothing that can be done about it. Some people play with the idea, they dabble in spirituality, then they go back to the regular world, let's say, and it's sort of a back and forth movement of meing and being. I'm just being, now I'm meing. I'm being, I'm meing. So these are all the Nisargadatta quotes. He actually has another quote that I find very helpful. He says, life is a river that flows between the banks of pain and pleasure. So if you look at the mind, let's say, or the ego, it's basically about pain and pleasure. I want pleasure. I don't want pain. So it's about desires and fears. And it's helpful to see this. It's helpful to become more aware of the brain, the mind, desires, and fears, so that you understand how everything's operating, how you're being led, how these affect your actions and your moods and your relationships in your life. Which again, obviously, and eventually you'll realize to see that it's not your life, that you don't have a life because you don't exist as a separate self. But for the time being, that's how it appears, that's how it feels. And of course, you can only be where you are at. You always need to be with the truth and be honest. As Gangaji says, just be honest. Just be honest with yourself. Just be honest with what you see, with what you realize, with what you notice. So moving on to a few more teachers, of course, Ramana Maharshi, he had many books, but basically his main thing for me is about who am I? And asking who am I reveals the answer, silence. Because the essence of who you are is nothing. It's empty. There's no one. So who am I? Silence. You are the silence. You are the stillness. Ramana Maharshi also says, you are awareness. Awareness is your name. Awareness is a great pointer. As we've just seen above, Nisargadatta would take us farther than that to the Parabrahman. But again, seeing awareness and consciousness and seeing their relationships, very, very, very helpful. Listening to silence. Ramana Maharshi is also famous for saying, there are no others. There are no others. And of course, this is realized when we realize there is no I. If there's no I here, then guess what? There's no I there, or there, or there, or in any other of the 7 billion human beings. Tony Parsons says, all there is this, being. He says, you cannot escape being because you are being. Being is the only constant. Tony Parsons is also one who would say that awareness is a transient state. So I don't want to argue about that. I disagree actually with what Tony says, the way he describes it. But anyways, he says that beingness is the only constant. So I am, as Nisargadatta says, I am aware, and I like it. I enjoy being. I love being. Even if there's pain and pleasure, there's something in here that inherently loves to be. And that, again, could be at all levels. I love to be a person. I love to be what I cannot not be, the unmanifest. So there is a love of beingness, a love of beingness, and you cannot escape it. You are always here and now. No matter where you go, there's a here and now. But of course, again, Tony Parsons says what can happen doesn't have to happen. Nothing has to happen. But what can happen is the dissolution of the I, the death of the ego, the end of separation. And Tony says this is emptiness, fullness. Emptiness, fullness. Not two things. Sounds like two, but it's Advaita, not two. No separation. So it's totally empty and totally full at the same time. He says this is the absolute appearing as the relative. This is nothing appearing as everything. This is the formless appearing as form. Advaita, not two. Okay? He says this is silence sounding and stillness moving. And these words pointing to that which is beyond. So there is no separate you. Adi Ashanti, another great teacher. Basically, I think he would say you are awake, aware spirit. Remember, all of these are just different words. I like what Adia says. He says, awareness is the context and consciousness is the content. So I said something very similar to this earlier, but basically, this awareness is the context of all life. And this awareness doesn't move, just like the ocean doesn't move. And yet maybe within that ocean, there is a variety of things. Same thing, within awareness, there is changing consciousness, but it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. It is here, now, everywhere, always. It just is what it is. So simple, so simple. Adi Ashanti says the truth is simple. It's the mind that complicates everything. It's the sense of feeling like a separate self that makes everything confusing. And what do I do? And where do I go? And me, and mine. But in reality, of course, when this drops, especially when dissolution of the I happens, it is seen by no one that all there is nothing, appearing as everything. All there is this. And it's just silent, still, and peaceful. Silent, Still awareness. Love. Again, we see that all there is love, that people are just living from their hearts for the most part, and they're doing what they love. They're eating what they love. They're watching what they love. They're engaging in what they love. They're spending time with people with whom they love. They're protecting themselves and they're afraid because they love. So love really is the essence of who we are as well. It's part of this love, one freedom of the absolute. Muji, awareness is prior to everything. As far as I can remember, it was Muji who first said, he was the first one that I heard say that awareness is prior to everything. A lot of times in spirituality, you hear people talking about going beyond, but it was very helpful for me to hear, oh, awareness is prior. So here's the ego, but guess what? The awareness is prior to the ego. And if you see that, you can see that you can't be the ego. It's impossible because the ego actually isn't constant. The person is unstable. It's not a thing, it's a process. So, but we don't always feel like a separate self. But when it comes up, oh, it's just a movement. It's Leela, divine Leela. It's just the play of consciousness. But that awareness always is. It's always awareing. It's always watching, witnessing without any effort. It's just noticing what is. So Muji might say, take a look, verify these words, find out for yourself. Stephen and Andrea Levine, I put them here because they were, let's say, my first spiritual teachers many years ago. And I always found their work to be extraordinarily wise, lots of understanding, tons of compassion and mercy. They spoke about forgiveness in such beautiful and helpful ways. A very skillful couple. They definitely lived what they spoke. They walked their talk, so to speak. And basically, I just loved them. I found them to be very, very dear souls. And so I wanted to include them here. Have mercy on yourself. Treasure yourself, they would often say. Love yourself as if you were your only child. Be kind to yourself. They would say, notice how unkind the mind can be just by noticing that. Stephen said, I became loving by watching how unloving I was. So if we just watch the violence and the unloving ways, which we all have, no judgment, we all have it, but by watching it more and more, it becomes painful, and that pain can motivate us to stop living in those ways, to stop being so unloving. Eckhart Tolle, of course, you are the now. You actually are the now. You are the context. You are the awareness. You are not the voice in your head. You are not the pain body. Byron Katie, God is what is. God is this. Don't believe your stressful thoughts. That's why we stress, because we believe the stressful thoughts, which when we question, we realize aren't actually true. Okay? And of course, she has her whole ask the 4 questions process of looking at things and questioning them. Remember, that which is true, you can look at it and question it till the cows come home, as they say, and it will stand. But that which is false, that which is unreal, if you question it, if you look at it, it falls apart. If you put the spotlight on it, it dissolves. So that's why questioning in a good way, not out of fear or some sort of neurotic obsession, but out of this place, again, of loving truth, wanting to know what's true, what's simply true, what is true right now. You can expose so much and reveal so much and see so much. Now, Satya Sai Baba, he may be a controversial figure, but for me, he was an amazing figure in my life for many years. Not just all of his miracles that he performed, but of course, his love all, serve all philosophy, help ever, hurt never, do good, be good, see good, free schools, free hospitals, love, give, serve. I mean, this was his life. From my eyes, this is what I saw. And of course, he was miraculous, was able to bilocate and materialize things for many years, and just had this aura of love. So I wanted to include him. Karl Renz, very funny individual who I was lucky to have lunch with one day. He says, look, be what you cannot not be. Be what you cannot not be. As soon as you start speaking, it's too late. You know, you are what you are, what you are. End of story. Jeff Foster, problems are just thoughts, and thoughts are not a problem. So don't believe your thoughts again. Loosen the grip on thoughts. Let them come, let them go. Jack O'Keefe, you can only lose what you are not. Don't be afraid to lose the ego, because you're not the ego. You can only lose what you are not. Only that which is false can and will fall away. That which is essentially you, essentially true, will always be there. Buddhism says you are free to do whatever you want, just try not to harm, hurt, or injure yourself or another. Okay? So you are free. But of course, in this world, of course, we're going to bump into each other. As they say, that's how the rocks, they soften or they smooth themselves out, the rocks, by bumping into each other in the rock tumbler. So it's going to happen. But intentionally, if we try not to hurt people, there is supposedly some merit in that. Of course, the less violence we do, the less suffering there is, and the more, therefore, peace and love will be experienced. Jesus, gotta love Jesus. I was Christian for many years. Love God with your entire being and love your neighbor as yourself. For me, again, God is love was the message of Jesus, and also truth. He was also a revolutionary figure in history, very powerful in his love of truth and his desire. Look, he challenged all the religious systems of his time and government systems and foundations and said, you know, you're not loving people. And that is our goal. That is our desire, is to love everyone, because every human being is a child of God, is an aspect of God, is a spark of the divine. Mahatma Gandhi, again, I had to put him here because I watched the movie Gandhi so many times. I read his book. Experiment with truth. Become a lover of truth. Surrender to truth. Satyagraha, the power of truth, and nonviolence, so important. Science, again, the brain creates a sense of self, but there isn't one. It's more of a verb than a noun. The universe is more than 99.999% empty space, including our own bodies. So science is catching up with spirituality, and they're realizing that this is nothing. It's an amazing nothing, which is appearing as everything. So all physical things are made of atoms, which are mostly empty space. The universe is made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons, what they would call baryonic matter, which comprises around 5% of what is. The remaining 71% is dark energy, 24% is dark matter. So again, basically going to the first sentence, everything is empty, dark space. It is the void, completely empty and yet full to the brim, without a personal, separate self. Vast, vast, vast. This universal love, unconditional love. Just a few things here. I thought, okay, I'll finish with 25 points. Health. Health is so important. If you're looking at why we suffer, a lot of times it's because we simply don't live a very healthy life. And again, if you go back to love, if you love yourself, you will live a healthy life to some degree. You have to answer these questions for yourself. You are the spiritual authority. As Adyashanti says, it's apparently your life and your free will and your freedom to choose what you want to choose. But look at your life. Look at how much violence there is. Look at how much health there is. Look at how much freedom and love there is, how much service there is, how much growth there is, we could say. All of this, again, is just being a spiritual scientist and paying attention. We can learn so much from just paying attention to our own lives and also watching the lives of others, and hopefully learning from our mistakes and, of course, the lives of others. So try to live a healthy life. I'm not a health nut. I'm presently a pescatarian. I mostly am vegetarian, but I do eat some fish every now and then. I don't think this is something to be rigid about. I don't expect everyone to become vegetarian, all 7 billion people. But look at what you eat, what you drink, how you live, and if you can, try to increase the health of your life. Follow your heart, do what you love, listen to your intuition. Again, we could say, we could frame it this way, that it's all about you and your relationship to God, you and your relationship to truth and love. And that's all that matters at some level, is about you and that relationship. Now, everybody else will have their opinion. A lot of people feel very comfortable giving opinions to us. They have the freedom to do that as well. But basically, it's about you. You're the one who has to live with you, and just be true to yourself. Follow your heart, follow your love, follow your passion. Again, you're free to do whatever you want. Just try not to hurt or harm or injure anybody. Last one, you. So I've just given you all these different concepts and ideas and things like that. What is life about for you? What is your direct experience of reality? How would you describe or define this mystery? Because it's definitely a mystery. So much we do not know. So many things we may never know. All we really know, Nisargadatta says, is I am. I am. I am aware. And again, I like it. I love to be. So how would you describe your life, your process, your journey, your unfoldment? Okay. So sorry if this was a little bit too fast. My wife's actually making lunch. So I was trying to get through this, and I may record this a few times because I feel like every time I record it, it may come out a different way that may or may not be helpful to no one. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. And look, from where I am, it is about suffering. I don't enjoy suffering. I have suffered at various times throughout my life. I want to, as Paul Hederman says, I want to travel more lightly. I want to reduce suffering in myself and reduce suffering in the world if I can. If I can. And it's very exciting for me to really feel comfortable after all these years of spiritual searching, very comfortable with these concepts of love, oneness, and freedom. There's no guarantees in any of this, but I have found the more I surrender to truth, surrender to God, surrender to this process and this unfoldment, that more peace arises, more love, more laughter, more joy, more appreciation, more gratitude, and suffering does tend to decrease. So that's what I wish for all beings everywhere. May all beings be free of suffering. May all beings be at peace. May all beings self-realize, if we want to put it that way. I won't pray for ego death for everybody, because again, I don't think that's even the point. It's not about everyone having ego death. It may or may not happen, but it's at least helpful to know what's happening. Even if you don't have ego death, it's important to see what the reality of things is. Yeah, because the truth will set you free, as Jesus said. Knowing the truth, understanding a little bit more, it does help in this life, which is that flow between pain and pleasure. So, okay, thank you so much. God bless you. Namaste. The light in me acknowledges the light in you. And have a wonderful day. We'll see you again soon. And bye-bye.